Right, so finally, after weeks of seeing resignations up and down the country from the Labour Party, as members and councillors alike quit in disgust at Keir Starmer's refusal to call for a ceasefire, to stand behind Israel's right to defend itself, regardless of the atrocities that state itself is committing in Gaza, the Zionist without qualification that he is, has finally been hit by his first frontbench resignation, at last. A significant number of his frontbenchers have defied the party line over Starmer's ceasefire stance up until now, and uncustomarily for Starmer, he hasn't come down on them like a ton of bricks over it. But then, they're all of his own faction these days mainly, showing not just the unpopularity of his position, but his own weakness and vulnerability in the face of criticism from party allies he can't afford to lose. But losing them, he now might well be. Having relied on them wanting to keep their cushy jobs in spite of disagreeing with him on his position regarding Israel and Gaza, the resignation of Imran Hussain, one of the first of the frontbench to speak out in favour of a ceasefire previously, arguably setting the tone that others have followed, could Starmer now face further resignations as he continues to act in defiance of the will of the British people on this, not interested in what we want, not being his focus, as he's on record as also saying now, not wanting to represent us but rule us is the inference? Well, cracks are finally showing. But he's coming down like a ton of bricks now. He's threatening sackings as people resign instead, as Imran Hussain has resigned instead. So will they force him to change his stance, all these people that previously signed this early day motion in favour of a ceasefire? Or will he ultimately be brought down in the end as leader of a party increasingly standing against him? Right, so finally, many of us have been asking for weeks, will a resignation ever bloody come? Will any of the Labour frontbench put their money where their mouths are? Because it was all well and good them coming out and calling for a ceasefire, in itself not insignificant given what a dictator Starmer is internally behind closed doors and how hard he has been known to crack down on those daring to dissent, though it was felt that having had 18 frontbenchers sign an early day motion put down by backbench lefty Labour MP Richard Bergen, that he would be in significant strife if he started sacking over a dozen people for doing this, for taking a stand to literally end the killing going on in Israel and Gaza, rather than just pause for lunch, as it were, before resuming their bombing, as remains his preferred option, at least until Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak inevitably call for a ceasefire at some point. After all, it is the only way the situation will ever be calmed down. Though I'd argue, with the Pandora's box of the reality behind Israel's motivations and their occupation, the eventual ceasefire should be used as an opportunity to finally get that two-state solution resolved and in place properly and meaningfully, because 75 years of dispute is more than long enough. But of course, for Starmer, this is the rub. If he started sacking people over signing that EDM, when he inevitably flips-flops into line with the US and the Tories, as he always does, and inevitably will have to as well, he will have sacked people who would have been proven right. However, things have changed thanks to the King's speech. Being the state opening of Parliament as it is, all EDMs and legislations sat on the statute book will have been cancelled out. And as such, Richard Bergen has put his early day motion for a ceasefire back down again. And as such, MPs, including those frontbenchers who signed it before, would now need to sign it again. Starmer has apparently already opted to head this off, though. Despite what I said a moment ago about sacking people who will inevitably, at some point in the future, be proven right by the need for a ceasefire, the frontbench have now been warned they will face the sack this time if they sign that EDM again. Such is the level of determination in Starmer to not back a ceasefire, no matter how many calls for it come his way. He is disgusting. But it is this act that has forced the first resignation from the frontbench in the form of Imran Hussain, the now former Shadow Secretary of State for the New Deal for Working People and MP for Bradford East. Having been told he would face the sack this morning if he signed Bergen's EDM calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, he chose to resign late last night instead, so he could sign it. That's one of those 18 now, and knowing who the other 17 are, who felt a ceasefire was needed previously, it'll be interesting to see how many, if any, do indeed end up joining Hussain in quitting Team Keith, or who don't sign it this time, clearly putting their own career prospects before the lives of innocent Palestinians they gave the impression they gave a damn about before. In a tweet put out at 11:17 p.m. last night, Hussain said, "I want to be able to strongly advocate for a ceasefire, as called for by the UN General Secretary. In order to be fully free to do so, I have tonight stepped down from Labour's front bench." To which end, he also attached his resignation letter, which, after the usual polite thanks for the opportunity spiel that resignation letters often carry, he laid it out for Starmer, and although he kept everything polite, he did say everything he clearly felt he needed to. He said, "Over recent weeks it has become clear that my view on the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza differs from the position you have adopted. As I write, more than 1,400 Israeli and 10,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed in the last month. This shocking number of fatalities is set to grow as indiscriminate attacks and the siege of Gaza continues. Yesterday, the United Nations Secretary General warned that Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children and stated that a humanitarian ceasefire becomes more urgent with every passing hour. Given the crisis unfolding, I wish to be a strong advocate for the humanitarian ceasefire advocated by the UN General Secretary, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and other UN humanitarian bodies, by numerous governments, and by leading humanitarian organisations like Oxfam, Save the Children, and Amnesty International. It is clear that I cannot sufficiently in all good conscience do this from the front bench given its current position. A ceasefire is essential to end the bloodshed, to ensure that enough aid can pass into Gaza and reach those most in need, and to help ensure the safe return of the Israeli hostages. As I made clear to the Foreign Secretary on Tuesday the 24th of October 2023, the situation in Gaza is now beyond that of a humanitarian catastrophe. The cutting of food, water, power and medicine to Palestinians in Gaza is an act of collective punishment that violates international law and is a clear war crime under the Geneva Conventions. Like many others, I was therefore deeply troubled by the comments you made during an LBC interview on the 11th of October 2023, where you appeared to endorse such actions by the Israeli military. Whilst I appreciate your subsequent statements to clarify your comments and the increased emphasis being placed on addressing the desperate situation in Gaza, and whilst we both want an end to the bloodshed, I believe the party needs to go further and call for a ceasefire. I have unequivocally condemned Hamas's attacks of the 7th of October, and I firmly agree that every country has a right to defend itself. This, however, can never become a right to deliberately violate international law on protecting civilians or to commit war crimes. It has always been my view, which I have made clear repeatedly in Parliament, that human rights are universal and that it is our duty to call out all those who violate international law and commit war crimes. I will therefore continue to press from the backbenches for a humanitarian ceasefire to protect civilians in line with the demands of the UN Secretary General, and beyond that for the realisation of a lasting resolution that will deliver peace for Israelis and Palestinians as part of a two-state solution. A graveyard of children he made reference to there, and if you're on the Labour front bench, it's a sacking offence now to sign an EDM standing against that. To stay on the Labour front bench is to have that on your conscience right now. That there hasn't been a stream of resignations since Starmer handed this diktat down shows an awful lack of conscience from my perspective, excusing himself, Starmer by the way, by saying a ceasefire will only help Hamas. Bullshit! It helps all concerned, notably children, to keep breathing, to have a life still in their breasts. All conflicts end when people start talking, and that always begins with a ceasefire. Those not calling for one have an ulterior motive. And when that motive means turning a blind eye to 10,000 civilian deaths in Palestine, and I'm not ignoring or belittling the Israeli deaths when I say that, but when half of those 10,000 deaths in Palestine are of children, when human rights organisations are calling this out, and when Labour is reportedly led by a former human rights lawyer after all, and he's sacking people, or prepared to if they stand for human rights, and the rights of those kids to stay alive at that, how anyone can frankly look at Keir Starmer in a favourable light and consider voting for a party led by him right now, God only knows. A vote for him right now is a vote to turn a blind eye to that, to support even more deaths as a lack of a ceasefire inevitably results in. I know I couldn't live with that on my conscience. Can you, Labour voters? But hey, he's bound to change his tune eventually, right? What a pity it won't be Labour members and representatives that convince him to do that, though. It'll be the Tory party leader who inevitably does. Solidarity to Imran Hussain. Principles stand, and principles are a rare commodity in the Labour Party these days. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer might be threatening to sack his front benchers for not wanting any more innocents to die, but plenty of members want him gone. Not that he ever listened to them, of course. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.